Hello and welcome to the podcast of fringeartculture.com. This podcast aims to enrich our community by focusing on local art and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Grant and this is Alison.
Hi, how you going?
And today we're joined by our special guest, Omi Lee, aka Naomi.
Hello, guys.
Welcome to episode 4. But we also want to hear from you. Hit us up in the comments or on our contact page. Let us know what you're up to. We want this to be a community built by the community for the community. We'll be chatting with artists, authors and musicians, sharing with you the best of what we can find in our local community, including author readings, flash interviews with musicians and sets from amateur comedians. And we'll be catching you up on what's been happening and what's coming up in the local area. All this available on demand when it's convenient for you via the blog or your podcast provider of choice. This month we featured one of Omi Lee's works as a frame to talk about how we engage with art and culture. Hey Naomi, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
Why don't you tell us a bit about what you do?
Sure. I'm an artist who's been working this is my 6th year now. So I've come through my emerging stage and now I'm having to be a bit more serious. And I create with acrylic, I paint, and I also create sculptures with acrylic.
Yeah, it's all really exciting work, stuff that I have never seen before meeting you.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun too.
I can imagine. So this month we've actually looked at one of your pieces in particular, entitled Cleansing. And we went out into the public and we got some feedback on that piece itself. We anticipate on being able to get out there and get some more as well, so we'll be able to give you that again before the end of the month. We've had a few people give us some really interesting feedback on that kind of style that you use and the emotions and how they felt about that piece, which we'll go through a little bit later.
And you've had that at a couple of shows, a couple of exhibits, haven't you? I know that it was at
I took it to a group exhibition in Paddington at Aspire Gallery, which was for Alter Ego. So I was actually exploring my ego within that piece, as well as I wanted to use that for a solo that I was having that was based on my travels in Helsinki and other parts of Finland. So I wanted to adapt that into it as well. So it kind of became a piece that was about exploring my alter ego as well as the cultures that I had experienced in Finland. And it all came together because of that concept of water, which is the main part of the piece.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so we've got a few questions for you, just so that people have a little bit more background about you in entirety. So I know that it took you some years of experimentation to find your groove with the palette knife, didn't it?
Yeah, so I spent the first couple of years of professional painting using pretty much anything I could find around the house and paintbrushes and things that I could pour out of, like cans and jars and toothbrushes and forks and stuff like that to make different textures. And sometimes I used paint scraper style tools, but it wasn't until working on the last 3 pieces in my first solo exhibition that I came across a palette knife and thought I'd have a bit of a play with it. And those 3 paintings came so naturally. I felt like I had found my style within those paintings. And I remember right when I was just finishing up those last 3 and I was getting ready to take them to my solo, I was kind of wishing that I had had more time to go further with that.
Yeah.
So by the time I had my next solo, I had almost wiped out the paintbrush strokes altogether and I was just concentrating all with the palette knife.
I always think that the palette knife is a really interesting thing. I think I don't know if you remember this on your mum's wall. I'm not sure whether it was your uncle or someone who'd painted it, but there was an ocean scene that had been done with a palette knife. And I just remember I just studied that painting for ages because it's such a unique thing to use a palette knife. I've never attempted it myself because I think I've always been afraid to. But I just really love that medium and that way of kind of it's almost abstract in a way where you can't think about it too much, which I know.
That's true. Yeah, it really is. You can control what you're doing to a degree,
Yeah.
but then there's also it is available to you to let some of that control go and
Yeah.
kind of just let the paint go where it wants to from the knife. It's to get fine lines and stuff like that. I use a smaller and sharper palette knife, but still it's never an exact line. And I think that's what I really like about it, is that it has its own kind of journey.
Yeah, it's like a kind of own kind of character. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's really hard to mimic someone else's work, I think. It's... Yeah, it's very unique. Everyone who uses the palette knife, they have a different unique style, and it's really hard to get that exact same, like 3 different colours of paint on the one palette knife and make it do the same thing on every single painting. So, I think it has a lot of diversity in that sense as well.
Yeah. So how would you describe your creative journey then? I know that this question might overlap a little bit.
Well, my work started off much more abstract than it is now. There were very little references used, so I was pretty much just experimenting.
Yeah.
Pretty much just throwing paint onto canvas. I did a lot of work on the floor. I did a lot of Jackson Pollock style.
Yeah.
Just dripping and throwing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it was really fun and just intuitive expressionism.
Yeah.
And once I started to take my work from that experimental, just fun stage, from that hobbyist kind of stage into something a bit more serious, I started to go back to my sketchbooks and draw more figures and stuff like that, and adapt those into the work where I had sort of minimal kind of figures with abstract backgrounds.
Yeah.
And from there, I evolved towards landscapes, and that became something that I really love doing. So now a lot of my work is based on landscapes and figures together in that semi-abstract style.
Yeah. And so I guess the acrylic that you work with, I know that you've sort of adapted that to use it as a textile and created tiles and skins and stuff out of that. It's such, like for me, I guess it's such a long process. It requires a lot of patience to create a work like that. And I think that was a really important part of taking that engagement piece out and explaining how it was built, because people just automatically see something square like that and think it's a canvas, and there's, you just put a picture on top. And as much as there's a lot that goes into that process, there's a lot more depth that comes to creating the whole 3D image organically like that, I guess.
Yeah, there really is a lot of time that's put into a piece like that. The first time that I made one similar, it took 400 days to create one layer at a time. So I have worked out since then how to multiply my productivity by creating a lot of 10 layered skins at the same time, and then joining them together so that I can do a lot more in one day. But I think that process, it helps me to be able to produce something where I'm sort of giving like a piece of what's happening in my studio each day to an artwork. And so I think that over time, that's something really interesting. It's like a different documentation to what I guess, It
would mean each piece is so completely different for that reason, and means something different to you.
Yeah.
But it's like the lines you get when you look at the strata in the earth, where you've got, thousands of years, but all your layers are like, well, here's a few days as they've progressed through.
Yeah, exactly. The first piece that I did in that style, I was actually trying to mimic those gradual tones through the Earth's surface, and there was a lot of browns and oranges and like yellows and all those earthy kind of tones, and with some water sort of layers on top. And so it can be described in that way, definitely. And there's some works that I'm making at the moment in a similar way. and I am actually using the environment and the weather as the tool to decide what colours I am using.
Oh, yeah.
So on a day-to-day process, and this is an exhibition that will be coming up next year at Logan Art Gallery.
Yep.
On a day-to-day process, I am taking a colour from the weather. So let's say it's a dark and stormy day. So I'm taking a grey or a black or even green, you know, for when we have those really like
Yeah.
hailstorms are
Yeah.
coming, those kind of skies. And then using that as a layer for that day. And then the next day, if the weather has changed, you know, then there might be like yellow
It's
or
a really cool idea.
something like that. Yeah. So it's, for me, that whole idea is that I am documenting the next 2 years sort of the weather
Yeah.
through this art form,
Yeah.
layer by layer, day
Yeah.
by day.
That's cool.
And I guess people would come to that and then sort of you can get a similar sort of reading from that with emotion as well. And like, you know, there was that connotation, I can't remember who said it, you might know, where people just automatically assume that like a rainy day means bad news and it's a bad thing.
Yeah, well, that's all cultural, isn't it? So I can't remember the guy's name.
We'll have to look that up.
There's a podcast I listen to called The Tim Ferriss Show, and he's got some brilliant interviews that he does. Really diverse people, but they're all kind of experts in their field. And he kind of says, he cuts it up and says, you know, what do you do in the first hour of your day kind of thing. And that's how he does his interviews. But this one particular guy, he was talking about how he interacts with his son. And they were talking about he just reframes his language when it's raining and puts like a happier kind of tone on it. It's like, oh, isn't it great that it's raining? Because, you know, his son likes going out in his gumboots and jumping in the water. And even when they went out in the snow, you know, making sure his little boy didn't get frostbitten toes. When he got some snow in his shoe, he's really into the whole idea of kind of that kind of stoic idea of just kind of accepting things as they are, and kind of talking his son to his son about the snow that's gone in his boot, and kind of just, you know, accepting, now my foot feels cold, and that's just how my foot feels right now. And but yeah, that reframing of those things.
Yeah, and then to kind of see the journey of the weather in representative of colour, and see how that really affects our emotions, and
true,
and take it that way.
Yeah, and it can be inspiring either way.
Yeah.
And the weather that I see out my studio window, since there's really no view at all, it's really all I've kind of got, you know, like my studio window, and this is like all of the pieces that I'm creating for this exhibition are all based on what I can see out of it. I'm really facing a fence, and I have like I have a couple of trees either side, and one of them's poinciana, so that's great. Once a year that comes out beautifully, and it gives a lot of beautiful inspiration. But really all I've got is the sky and whatever's happening in that. And so I'm using that as the full inspiration for this whole exhibition. So.
It's a really cool idea. So your work requires a lot of patience and persistence. Do you think this is an essential quality of being an artist?
I definitely think so on the business side of things. You don't necessarily have to be a patient creator. There's plenty of amazing artworks in the world that have been painted really spontaneously or created really spontaneously in quick sessions in a studio. So you don't necessarily have to be going out and creating works that take 400 days. But definitely from the business point of things, and coming into your art, finding your style and evolving your style for each exhibition and getting your work out there, they all require a lot of patience and persistence. And I think an ability to embrace criticism is like, I mean, you have to have that as well, and you have to be able to keep going.
Yeah, even the other night when we were at Miami Marquetta, so I don't know if we want to explain what this is.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So Miami Marquetta have artist nights run with their Tapas Club once a month on the Wednesday, the fourth Wednesday of the month. And I run the artists who exhibit there, so I look after them, help them get all set up, and
Yeah.
look after their marketing and promotions, and help get people in to see their work, and introduce them to their audience and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Which is an important part, I guess, when you're looking at business. And a lot of artists don't know how to make that leap, which is where you come in, which is great. But I remember Mark Davey, he's also a local artist. He said to me he's heard everything as far as, what his work's been called. And, I guess that's one of those things anyway. Even as a writer, I know that I have to have a fairly thick skin and what people say about my fiction in particular. But, yeah, it's one of those things I think that you get better at over time.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I guess that's personally as well. Like, you take a lot of criticism just in your personal life too. And I think as you get older, you just tend to get better at believing in yourself or accepting yourself, and you just
Do you
get
think
on with it.
it's almost harder with art though, because you do put yourself so much into your
I think
art?
some people do find that.
Yeah.
I tend not to, and I have spoken to a lot of artists about this too, as I guess I can't say that I give advice, but as I guess a suggestion, to help them work out how to get through it themselves. But I think if a person hasn't had a chance to know why you created the work or understand what it's about, then their criticism may only be about their level of understanding of what they're seeing.
Yeah.
And so that can't necessarily be taken personally, because, they're not criticizing you or what you've created.
Yeah.
They're just criticizing what they know and understand about what's in front of them. And you can't really expect everyone to understand your style of work, unless it's very traditional.
Yeah.
So I think if you're going to be a bit out of the box and you're going to do something a little bit out there, and people are seeing it without having an interpretation given to them, you kind of need to allow them to just make up their own mind about it, and don't take it personally, because they're not hating on you or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's interesting the way you say that, especially because you have, people have, all they're really criticizing is their straw man of what they take away from it. So it's all of their personal interpretation. Like, are we going to get into talking more about the engagement? Well, as we go through that, I'll talk about an interesting discussion I had with a guy from work about your piece and how he came to that. So we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Okay, so you've said in the past that your semi to full abstract style enables viewers to see their own interpretations in the work, and that's meaningful to you. How important do you think it is for viewers to be able to extrapolate their own meaning from work without the artist pushing their agenda?
Well, I'd like to say that I don't have an agenda at all, but that isn't exactly true. My agenda is only for myself. It's not to put onto anyone else. But when I abstract and deform the references in my work, I seek the beauty within the flaws. I allow the paint to flow and move to where it wants to go naturally. And so I use the palette knife as a guide, but to get some forms, but I let the paint, if the paint wants to make a leg really skinny and another leg really larger, then I don't try to mess with that. If that's the way that the paint wants it to come out, as long as those two legs are there, or there's half a leg, or so that that's a figure, or that I've been able to interpret that there's a figure. It doesn't really matter whether one limb's shorter than the other, or stuff like that. And that's what I enjoy putting out into my work, and that's for myself. It is a personal agenda. I do that because it's the way that I want to see the world. I'm not completely immune to fears of acceptance, and I have my own stresses. When new people are coming over to the house, and I freak out, and I think, oh no, and when I'm trying to find something to wear and stuff like that, I do think about what other people are going to think.
Yeah.
But in my art, I want all of those references that I'm painting to just be.
Yeah.
And that and they don't need to be fixed up or touched up, and they don't need to be anything better than what they are. They
It must
can
be
just,
kind of liberating.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. So I mean, and it's not something that I'm trying to push on to anybody else, and I don't actually think that many people would get that from my work without it being explained to them. So the other side of making sure that that paint just does what it wants to do in those contours of each form is that through that deformation and abstraction, that people can find their own interpretations within it. So the audience will see forms outside of the reference that I originally used, which I think is great, and through their interpretations it allows me to see their connections with the work. If you take the featured artwork, for example, the subject reference was a stunning model submerged in a milk bath. You don't actually see that in this painting now. My connection with that reference was a feeling of calm and reflection. I reflected on my time in Finland. I saw myself submerged in a lake as I was looking at this reference photo. And as I started on the work, I began to portray my thoughts and feelings into it. So I was seeing water as a nurturer. I painted in the fingernails, hair and facial expressions first. As Grant said, I work from the foreground towards the background. And I chose 2 contrasting skin colours so that I had light and dark tones so that I could have shadows, and then using the palette knife, the details in the skin become looser, so the darker tones naturally came off looking like bruising. And I actually ended up using that as part of the next phase of the painting. It took me further into my own personal exploration, so I could see the water was now becoming like a healer. Layer upon layer, I chose colours that became deeper and deeper in colour, and the water becomes bigger than the subject as it keeps going. So you've got that sculptural water kind of holding that body, and towards the end it was becoming like it was a life source, and that helped me to look into it further as how important water is to me, and the connections that I have with it. And I started to think about also what kind of ties I wanted to have with it into the afterlife. So it kind of does look like perhaps that the girl is either drowning or coming out of the water, like a rebirthing kind of thing, or a submerging into the water and sort of becoming one with it. And that's how the process kind of starts, from something, I guess, kind of simple. And as I work with it, I bring more and more of my emotions and my own personal journeys into it until, I've come to the end and I've...
It's interesting how you say that, and sort of that whole process of kind of the afterlife and kind of letting yourself go and become one with the ocean and just disappearing. I really like that idea, and it's not something I'd really even thought about before looking at this.
Well, I guess I've thought about it, and it's not that I want to drown. It's just that when I am looking at what choices that we have of after, once we have passed on, and I guess for me, I've always kind of thought that in some way I might experience that. I mean, it's just, I guess I'm pretty open-minded, and I'm always sort of thinking about the possibilities of, what could happen. And I guess if I was going to experience what happens after death to my body, then the idea of a coffin or a fire doesn't really sit well with me.
Yeah, the idea of a coffin has never sat well with me.
So water's always been for me that kind of that healing element,
Yeah.
the nurturing element. Something that it helps us have that connection to the earth, and
Yeah.
I guess so. For me, it's just seems like a really nice way to go.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I guess it reminds me a little bit reminiscent of like the Viking death, but I guess there's that
Yeah.
fire there that you kind of have to overcome beforehand.
I know. Yeah,
Oh,
I've
well,
also had thoughts about, how you can get frozen with like nitrous or something like that and then
Yeah.
smashed, or I've always thought that might be a nice.
I like the
Shattered into
idea
1,000 tiny pieces.
of becoming a tree and how I didn't
Yeah.
even realize this, but human remains actually are quite acidic or something, so you can't actually, unless there's some way of treating it before, and I don't know the process, so don't quote me on this, but the process of actually being a tree and being able to plant it is something new because of that they had to do something with the ashes to make them less acidic or something.
Oh, okay.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah,
But I had
there
a
should
friend.
be more choices, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful way, and I think kind of in a similar vein, kind of just going into the ocean kind of does the same thing. You kind of out there and you just end up feeding the fishes and become, like one with the world again.
Yeah, but I guess as a society we're all just supposed to, I guess, accept that that's it, and
I think the only problem I think I would have, and this is probably because I think too much about it, is that I'd need to be let go somewhere in the middle of nowhere, because you wouldn't want your body rocking up and laughing, someone freaks out because they think you've been murdered, but no,
well, that's
you.
true. I mean,
Bloated
if
corpse
I've gone into
watching up on a beach somewhere.
yeah. When I've gone into it really deeply, I've sort of thought, well, I would have to have some kind of weights or something like that, and and I guess I would become fish food or something. But
I guess it's hard. It's one of those things. But that water really is sort of, I don't know. I really saw surrender in her face, like surrendering to, fate or whatever it is, and just letting go, and that the tidal kind of wash of the waves and all that kind of stuff really kind of meshed in with that for me. I guess that was sort of where I came from it.
Yeah, and that's it's definitely part of what I was feeling at the time as I was creating it. Yeah.
I thought that there were some really interesting responses when it came to going out and in the engagement piece with the community. There was one that was interesting because she saw she thought it was kind of erotic.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that was the person who didn't want their thing recorded.
Okay.
But they chose not to
That's
record
really
it even before they saw
interesting.
the image.
Yeah.
So she thought, that it seemed erotic to her. So there was something like that going on there. And she made an interesting comment that she wouldn't want to see it up in like a public building or something like that. So she was definitely making some interesting judgments on it. So I don't know where that was coming from, but
Different way of surrendering.
Yeah, possibly.
Maybe.
Yeah.
There were a few people that did see the kind of the bruising and stuff, and thought there might have been some domestic violence kind of issues going on there. So because that's a fairly topical. So it's strange that they thought. And then one of the most interesting is one of my workmates who I just mentioned that I went and did this, and I showed him the image, and asked him if he'd give his opinion on it, and he really didn't want to. Like, he was kind of he fought back in a way that I wouldn't have expected him to, because of the conversations we have. We're very open with each other and talk about all sorts of stuff, but it seemed like from what he said, if I try and get the right feeling from him, I don't want to kind of straw man his argument, but it seemed like he had an opinion of what artists were trying to do when they made art, and trying to push that agenda, and I think he saw some of the bruising on that, and thought that you were really trying to push the idea of domestic violence, and he didn't want to like engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe because of that. I don't know. I can't say that much about, you know, whether that's why he didn't. But I think it seemed like he thought that the art was a bit maybe no, that it was kind of self-indulgent. Like, because it was self-indulgent, then it didn't mean that he could say his own opinion of it, because it didn't, what he thought
Like it
didn't
spoke
mean
for
anything.
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then him saying anything didn't matter. He said that it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm like, well, how does it not mean anything? It's, you know, what shapes do you see? What figures do you see? What imagery do you see? And what does each piece of that imagery say? And like, he's like, oh, well, it's a woman and she's got bruising. I'm like, oh, okay. So it's a woman, okay. Because that's one thing, when I went out and did it, I made sure not to say it's a woman. I asked people to tell me, because I would be interested to see if somebody thought that it wasn't a woman.
Yeah, sure.
But I wanted to give them the opportunity to see that in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. It was a very interesting experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it was, and it's a shame that he felt like the story was already told, because as much as I like to tell the stories of how I came to make an artwork, I enjoy hearing what other people get out of it more, and to hear their interpretations, because I think that through doing that I then learn more about society and how they feel about, you know, certain subjects or topics through my process of making art. I actually don't think that art that has an agenda is a bad thing, though. I, as a person who doesn't watch the news or read the papers, I do really enjoy art that has an agenda, and believe it does play an important role in our society, because for me to be able to view the world's tragedies and celebrations through art and culture, I can be a witness to how individuals have personally been affected by events that I haven't really taken in from other news sources.
There's one interesting thing. I showed another guy at work, a friend who's actually from Punjab, and he told me, interestingly, that in their weekly newspapers, they do this sort of community engagement type thing where they'll put a piece of work for people to caption, to kind of give their impression of it. And the interesting thing is, it's not like, you know, you can do that on Instagram or whatever these days, but the thing about that is nobody else gets to see what anyone else says until the next week when the paper comes out.
Oh, cool.
So you're not influenced by other people's opinions that way.
Yeah,
So
sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. He had something interesting to say about the piece as well. He saw the darker colour around the edges like a wall.
Oh, yeah.
The lighter colour as being a background that's through the wall. So there's like extra depth there.
Mm-hmm.
With the figure standing kind of in that space.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's really interesting too. Yeah.
So to a certain degree, do you think we need to be taught how to receive art and culture in some ways?
I think that society does need some encouragement at times, but everyone is capable of appreciating some form of art without being taught, I believe.
Yeah.
I think it's actually up to the creatives of the world to produce art and culture for the people, you know, and put it into places where they don't have to go to the galleries to receive it.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, especially in our area, because, you know, I spoke to, and it was really amazing when we went out to Eats and Beats in February, and just before we launched and canvassed and spoke to a lot of people there, and some of them are like, we have an art gallery. What? And I guess it's kind of, art galleries there's always a place for them. I think we need to have them in our community, but I think that there's a growing need for grassroots art and culture movement where people can feel like it just becomes normal and everyday to connect with other ideas and perspectives, and just without it being an effort. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think at the
absolutely.
moment people just don't know either how to do it, or that they should, or if they want to, where they go to do it. Or
That's right. And it shouldn't be, I guess it shouldn't necessarily be people asking the question, where do I access art? It
Yeah.
should just be everywhere,
Exactly.
and just ready for people to feed off, and,
Yeah.
just walking down the street or...
We were even saying, like, who wants to go into for the Hyperdome, for example, and see, massive big advertisements, even now they're even like short video clips, but wouldn't you much rather see, 4 different pieces of artwork that rotate, or, just have a mural on the wall rather than, the shop front or something, similar to what Brady's done in their shop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Creativity's kind of been taken over by the marketing world, and kind of people don't get to see anything that's, creative, or that creatives have produced that doesn't have an agenda.
Yeah,
that
that's
isn't
right.
trying to tell them something or sell them something. Everything's part of a marketing campaign these days.
I mean, as much as there's artistic value in that as well, the people that are creating these ads and graphic designs and stuff like that. But it is all for a commercial. They're all just trying to sell something.
Yeah.
And I think even for graphic designers, that can take away a lot of their creativity as well, because at the end of the day, they're just trying to sell something through their work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Tammy said something like that, where she used to work for somebody who was that on the Sunshine Coast or something?
I can't remember exactly.
There was lots of koalas and dolphins jumping out of the water, and then it got to the point where her employer was just bringing her images from other places and say, we just want a version of that.
Just make it look like ours.
Yep.
And we didn't copy it.
Change it enough so that we're not going to get done on IP.
That's it'd be very sad to be sitting at that desk, I'm sure, in those kind of moments. Yeah.
Also, for anyone who didn't realise either, when I said Brady's shop, what I'm talking about is a new burger and bake place called Bacon Burger in Beenleigh. They've actually got a wall in there by Phil B. I was lucky enough to go down and actually watch him paint that. The first time I've actually seen someone do it live, which was really awesome. But you can go down and have a look at his work down there. And Brady's got some of her own work up as well.
Yeah, and fantastic burgers there too.
Oh, yeah.
I'm getting down there once a week.
Yeah, I know. I actually said, because she put her new menu up, I was like, we should go down this morning, but we didn't. I'll go.
Yeah. No, it's really good. Love it there.
So one point that's come up again and again is the idea of bias in how we're coming to art. So I just put a little bit together about bias and how it affects us, and I'll just go through that now. Most people understand what bias is, but I worry that a lot of people don't perceive how deep it goes into the way we make decisions. Bias is important though, because it helps us make quick judgments in pressure situations where we can't invest too much time in the decision-making process. So we use these little shortcuts, which we call heuristics. And they're simple rules of thumb that we kind of learn over time and we build upon. And they're reinforced because they work good enough. So we tend to use them, and they include things like educated guesses, your intuitive judgments, the stereotypes we make about people, profiling that we do, and without sometimes thinking or without thinking, as well as just things that we think of as general common sense. Each of the heuristics that we use they're useful, but they're flawed at the same time. Depending on how educated you are in a certain field of study, only the most appealing facts, those are the ones that also inform other beliefs that we have, that back them up. They're the ones that will come to mind and get used in our educated guesses. So anyone who's actually, you've studied a course or something on a particular thing, there's a Robert Sapolsky, who's actually a evolutionary biologist, something like that. He actually does a really good talk where he actually gives examples of all of these things that people think have as common knowledge about a certain subject. And then he says, yeah, that's totally wrong. And he kind of goes through
all the myths.
Oh yeah, common myths about each kind of field of study. And a lot of people have mentioned, and it's once you actually learn about a subject, the first thing you do is realize how wrong everyone else is with their common understanding. And that's why most educated guesses suffer from what's known as the availability bias, which often skew what we think of the probability of things happening, like, whether something's likely to happen or whether it's likely to have happened. You can kind of, or you also get this, what they call, what is it? Ad hoc ergo proctor hoc, which means after, therefore, because, which is a really common judgment that people make about something having happened, and then they go, oh, well, what did I do just before that? But that's not necessarily the case, because correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. Sometimes the cause can actually be a third thing that's caused both things, or they might be totally unrelated. And also, if you think you don't do this, sorry to tell you, but everyone does. It's like, it's one of those unfortunate things about, because it works. Biases work. So it's best to just be aware of them. So that way we can kind of think, at least, maybe try and pick the signs of when you're using bias. That's probably the best we can do, because they're going to come. It's going to come all the time. One way to show how invalid these judgments are is to look at the logical fallacies that make them up. And when I say that, there's a couple of different types of logical fallacies. There's formal logical fallacies, which are actual invalid logical arguments. So if you say, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. So that's like kind of like a logical form that would work. So that follows. But you can have an illogical argument where the logical structure isn't valid, like the premises don't lead to the conclusion. Well, informal logical fallacies, which we use, which kind of show up in biases all the time, are valid logical arguments. But the problem is, they assume that the premises are true when most of the time we haven't proved the premises. The information we feed into it are often guesses or used bad information, and then we make a conclusion. So therefore, the conclusion isn't actually it doesn't actually work. So here's one that I had a look at, and this one's really obvious. So we've got, if I said that because I've never seen a black swan, I've only ever seen white swans, therefore all swans are white. And I could go on to argue that I don't even know what it means for a swan to be anything other than white. Therefore, it's absurd to believe that such a thing exists. So the first argument is actually an argument from ignorance. So it basically says, I don't have all the information about swans and the colour of swans, even though I'm asserting that I do. And the second part is an argument from personal incredulity, which means, I can't imagine how that could happen. So that's not a good argument. Just because I can't imagine it doesn't mean that it isn't. If I could make an argument that says it's logically impossible that is the case, then that would work. So these errors that we make are often exploited by advertisers. In fact, if you did a marketing course, you would probably be taught about them. They're used, appeals to emotion, all that sort of thing. These are all biases that go in and affect the way we make decisions. When we go to buy a product, this will make you look cool or whatever, or you need this because of whatever reason. They're the kind of arguments that are made that appeal to those biases, or it'll make your life this much easier and quicker. And everyone's like, oh, well, I'd love my life to be quicker and easier, like this particular task. So yeah, that sounds great. It's the kind of thing where you need to go and look at the evidence for those sort of things. So bringing this back around to the way we enjoy art, as we probably saw from the conversations that we're having earlier with Naomi about how people perceived the piece that we took out, these biases actually affect how we see the art. So what we take away from it. We can actually, project things onto the art. But as well as that, they can actually affect the decisions we make about fundamental aspects of our life. One question it all raises is, if we're so bad at making decisions, why do we even worry? Why even worry about it? Why don't we just, roll through in ignorance of it all? Yeah, you could do that. But it's probably a bit better to, examine your life. I think it was Aristotle that said the unexamined life isn't worth living, or was it Plato? And so the best we can really do is try to be aware of them and do our best, knowing that you'll never make a perfect decision. You'll only ever make a good enough decision, unless you try really hard to get all the information you can about a subject. And then from there on, you just need to be happy with the choices that you've made. Happiness is all about acceptance, really. If you want to know more about cognitive biases and heuristics and how our judgments are flawed and we probably shouldn't trust anything that we think, you can have a look at the links that we've put in the show notes. And there's a couple of really good podcasts that kind of talk about the subject. One is Rationally Speaking, where it's a philosophy podcast. So if you're into that sort of thing, I personally am. It's just a little hobby that I have. I think we've spoken about it before on the podcast. So what did you think? What do you guys think about cognitive biases?
Our brains are very complex, aren't they?
Yeah. Just thinking about logical arguments and stuff like that, you'll start to see the flaws in people's thinking around you. It's a bit of a curse, actually. But one good thing about Rationally Speaking, on the recent podcast that I will put a link to, they were talking about how we can actually find new heuristics to use, new and things that bear out of statistics. So like there's this 37% rule for exploration versus exploitation. So if you have a scenario where you're going to a new town, if you want to go out to dinner, you'll find 37% of the places, once you've explored 37% of the places at random in that town, you will actually have looked at the range of the best and worst possibilities of places to eat. So from that, you can then make a judgment. Mm-hmm. And it actually has built into it the idea of optimistically searching for a good answer to the problem that you have. So if you go out looking to say, I'm going to enjoy going out and I'm going to enjoy what I find, then you've got more potential to actually find something that you enjoy. So,
didn't he also use the example that, say for example, you're wanting to buy a house and you decided that you're going to look at 10 places. Really, using that 37% rule, you could get to the 37% point. So out of that 10, that might be 4. Yeah. And within that 4, if you haven't found one that you liked by the 4th one, you should just take the 4th, because the rest of it's all just going to be a waste of time. But you need to kind of almost have that idea of how many you want to see to start with. So you might decide you want to see 20, in which case that 37% might be different. But within those first 4, obviously, I think isn't there a bias that means that you automatically take the first one or something like that?
Yeah, so you actually have to go against that bias to actually optimize your searching.
But it's sort of a way of kind of working with that idea to sort of be aware of our biases, but then make the best decision based on that as well.
Yeah, informing your biases. That's why when it comes to someone who's investigated a field of study, they can actually better inform their guesses about that field of study. So like if you're a cop and you're exposed to people every day, a certain amount of stuff you might do might inform biases that are bad, but then there's a certain amount that, you get really attuned to somebody who's looking a bit suspect versus somebody who's just looking nervous. Mm-hmm. So you can actually, you tune your senses. So you can trust your gut if you're educated in a field. But if you say, well, I can trust my gut all the time because I just need to trust my body, then you could be fooling yourself because you don't actually have enough training in that specific area to know whether you're right or wrong. You're just going to make an assumption. That's just an optimism bias.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds to me really that like the more biased you are, probably the easier that like your decision making is. Because
Well, yeah, the easier it feels.
yeah, but at the end of the day, you're missing out on so many things, so many experiences, and you're probably missing out on making the best decisions. But yeah, the less kind of choices that you put in front of yourself, I suppose, the easier it is just to say, well, I'll just take that first one that I see, like what you're saying about
exactly.
the house. Yeah. In my experience, I tend to put too many things on the table, and and overanalyze a lot of decision making. So I guess it's probably good to find some kind of happy medium in there.
Yeah.
And this 37% that you're talking about probably is my ideal space to work within.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't until this podcast I even knew it existed, but it was based on a book that they've written. So it'd be interesting to read that book. We should we'll find it and we'll put it in the show notes so that you can go in and have a look at it.
Yeah, I think it was called an Algorithms for Life or something like that. So there are a couple of statisticians. So these kind of things are really just ways to improve our biases or to inform our biases.
I do believe that anyone who can open up to more more choices and more experiences are going to have a more fulfilled life.
Yeah. I think that the important thing is to not think that you can overcome them all once you're aware of them.
Well, that's right.
Because you definitely can't.
No. You can't. And like when it comes to, we were talking about last time on the podcast, implicit biases when it comes to seeing people of different cultures. So that's once again your biases on where you grew up and who's the in group and who's the out group, that you don't even realize you're doing. You judge people. Everyone does it. Yeah. In a way, people don't like the sound of this, but everyone's racist. And that's not saying that everyone's intentionally racist. It's just that's actually part of human biology.
Yeah, it's just the way our brain makes sense of the world. We put things in categories and we align this with this. And
it's also because we're trying to put ourselves in a category too.
Yeah.
We want to know where we fit in. So we have to kind of place everything else around us somewhere so that we know where that is and we can feel good about ourselves by, I guess, being biased about things that we think aren't good.
Yeah.
There was something I heard recently, someone who was aligned with the whole Black Lives Matter thing, and they'd written an article and said that all white people are racist. And like, yes, that's true, but once you put that all white people are racist,
then that's a racist statement in
itself. It is. You're actually making it, and because we're all racist, it doesn't matter whether you're white, black, or indigo. And it's kind of, that person sounds like they're not perceiving their own bias.
And like, it's because a lot of our ideas about who we are and where we fit into the world is formed at a very early age. And so we will end up in a sort of reinforcing that way of thinking all our lives.
Yeah,
and so
it's almost like you're fighting against it sometimes too. To especially if you've been told that you're a certain like personality or a certain education level or whatever, and you have been boxed by someone else, then you're kind of always fighting for a way to stop that bias from coming towards you.
But unfortunately, Naomi has to leave us. So thanks for being with us, Naomi, and everything that you've added.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's been lots of fun. And thanks for taking my work out there to the people. And
we look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I can't wait to hear more.
Yeah, lovely. So through exploration of universal themes, we see that art and culture has the power to make us question how we perceive things. When we look at Naomi's journey in creating the feature piece that we've had on this month, we see that despite her exploration of themes such as death and the afterlife, this image struck a different chord with many of its viewers. What we found was really important when asking the public about this piece was to guide them into making up their own minds about what it meant to them and what was represented in the image, enabling them to ask more questions and be more open in that process. And this is a really important tool when engaging with art and culture. If we view art with a closed mind, we miss out on so much of the experience of what it has to teach us. We see that art has a lot to do in this way with mindset. So art, even for the viewer, can be seen as a tool that enables a deeper connection with an idea and an emotion. Just as the artist is exploring those things, it can be seen on both ends. Through active engagement with an artwork, particularly, I think, songs and stories, as much as we see it with visual art, but in a different way, we're able to explore how we view the world and see how our mindsets colour our interpretations. Essentially, I guess, the stories we tell ourselves and the things that we believe about ourselves can either prevent change from happening or allow new ideas and new concepts to blossom within us.
The way we see ourselves is really important. One example of that is everyone knows Andrew G from Australian Idol. He now goes by the name of Osher Günsberg. And the first time I heard that, I'm like, why is he calling himself Osher?
But, you know,
And
for
why should-
ages, I actually didn't. I was like, maybe it's a different person. They look identical. What's going on?
No, I was like, no, yeah, that's Andrew G. Why is he calling himself a different name?
I thought maybe he had a twin.
Why should I call him a different name? I'm just encouraging him. But later on, I actually found an article that he wrote on his blog. He has a blog about why he did the name change. It's actually really interesting, and it has a lot to do with how he saw himself and his mindset. So he needed a bit of a reboot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit through that. The piece is called My Name. He begins by talking about his early time in radio, where he was given the nickname Spidey when he was at B105. He then went to Adelaide, where who was he looking? I'll read on from here. When I finally scored a shift while the sun was up at SAFM in Adelaide, here's what my new boss and mentor Craig Bruce responded with on hearing my request for my real name. Andrew Ginsberg in Adelaide? Nah, Andrew G. Somewhere in the middle of all this, on one of my many journeys to Israel, where I met a revered shaman in Tel Aviv. He told me about the power of a name and how what we call ourselves affects our lives. He then goes on to kind of talk about his experience with this guy who did a bit of a, sounds like he did a numerological reading for him, and he kind of talks a bit about the feeling that he got. So he goes on to say, now I'm the son of 2 doctors and was raised to believe that if there's evidence for something, then we believe something. I have a healthy amount of cynicism within me. He explained that the path that I was on led to a darkness and a possibly grave illness. He then said, changing the energy around your name will change your life and your pathway. If it won't help, it won't hurt, I thought. So when it came time, I chose the name of the coolest man I'd ever met. He was a Calvin Klein ad-looking ex-commando cameraman I'd worked with in Israel, a guy so cool he made Brando look like a hobo. Hi, my name's Andrew. Hello, Osher. That's a cool name. You know what it means? Happiness. Takes a long drag on a cigarette, winks, and strides off to then direct the most complex but easiest shoot I've ever produced. So that's what I went with. I didn't have to tell anyone it was my name, I just had to know it was my name. That very night in 2009, within me I'd made a switch. From then on, within me I was Osher. My phone rang about half an hour later. Out of the blue, it was Craig Bruce again, asking me if I'd be able to fill in at Today FM breakfast show for the next morning. The biggest radio gig in the country, and my old boss was asking me to hold the wheel while they were sorted out some things internally. This was in 2009. Things began changing so much. I started getting bookings for gigs that I'd never been booked for before, people treating me differently. The change was remarkable. I'm completely aware that it may have been everything to do with how I saw myself, and therefore others reflecting what I was experiencing. But it didn't matter. It was working. He goes on then to talk about how things kind of went on a bit of a downhill after that. And then he recounts this last experience. He went on just after that, he broke up with his wife. Idol finished, so he didn't have that gig on anymore. And his friend took him snowboarding, and he recounts this part of the story. I carefully clipped my Rosengolds and gingerly got on the chairlift. I don't know if it was the mountain air or my brain remembering how to ski again for the first time since I was a teenager. But I went up the mountain that day a snowboarder named Andrew and came down the mountain a skier named Osher. That was it. From that moment on, I introduced myself as Osher to everyone I met. Perhaps it was the fact that both my parents also changed their first names, but something about being Osher just feels right. So when we meet, please call me Osher. That's what my friends call me. So that kind of really crystallizes the point of how our mindset can really change, changes how you see yourself, or something can make you change how you see yourself. It's like almost like a religious conversion of sorts. Many people have those sorts of extreme experiences when they go through something like that. But it can be, a name change, or you experience something and from then on you're like, I can't go back to that old way. Everything's changed. My philosophy's changed.
And it's funny actually when you think about when you think about yourself, and a lot of the ideas that we form, especially because it happens very early in our life, we don't realize how many of those things are quite fixed. Like, especially when we're talking about ourselves, like I might think to myself, I'm not a maths person. I don't do maths. I'm not very good at maths. I don't really like maths. But what I'm doing is kind of limiting that experience and stopping my growth in that area. But that applies to a lot of different ideas and concepts.
Yeah.
So I find that engaging with art and culture, especially for me, a big thing is books. It really does, if you're reading the right books, and taking it in and engaging with it with an open mind, then you're more likely to kind of question what you believe.
Oh, yeah.
I think, especially, I've read a lot more non-fiction stuff than I have a lot of fiction in the last couple of years. And I think that perspective has been amazing. I mean, books are all supposed to be about, living 1,000 lives, because we can't possibly imagine the extent of perspectives that there is in the world, and the tapestry that makes us all up is just amazing. So it's one aspect. That's what I really love about stories.
Well, I think that's about all we have for this episode.
So I know that Omi Lee's gone now, but if you want to catch some of her work, she's going to be exhibiting with a collaboration of a couple of other local artists. So we've got Phil B is also going to be working with a collaboration stuff with Omi Lee's stuff at Miami Marquetta next Wednesday night. And we'll have the details of that up on our in the show notes.
Wednesday
this Wednesday coming, which is the 29th of June. Sorry, I had to look at my computer then. Always forget the date. But it's, Damien Smith is another fantastic local artist, a little bit outside Logan, but south of Brisbane, who they're collaborating with as well. That's why she had to run away. She had to go and swap pieces with him. But yeah, so that's something else that's coming up. If you haven't seen it around either, I would check out Tammy's Art Studio, because she's also running some, I think it's called Art Vino, so classes where you can get in and might enjoy a couple of glasses of wine and have a good giggle and get an art lesson while you're at it. So that's also a great way to get into it if you're not really sure. The wine breaks the ice.
I think the last one was very...
yeah, she booked out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm intending on probably going to the next one. So come on and say hi.
And until next time, thanks for being with us. And as a reminder, leave comments about the episode on the blog, Twitter, or on Facebook. Share the podcast via Twitter or Facebook post. And if you like what we're doing and you want to get involved, hit us up on the contact page. See you next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a real big fan of more just kind of um, philosophy that makes you think about things a different way, because all the things that we think are made up of arguments, philosophical arguments. So I kind of get a kick out of thinking about why I feel a certain way about a subject and then saying, well, are the arguments that I use to back that up valid arguments, and legitimate arguments? Do the assumptions I'm plugging into that argument, are they well backed up? And if they're not, then I can kind of explore that way, rather than that. The books, listening to a narrative is another way
Yeah.
of making an argument.
Yeah.
It's kind of that whole idea of different truths. So you have like a truth as far as like facts about reality, but then you can have like a philosophical or maybe like a moral truth that is a little bit more, a little bit looser. It doesn't have the same sort of, it's not built up. The argument isn't built the same way. It's more of a narrative structure. The argument is more of a narrative. And I think people like Socrates used to do that. Like you'd have a narrative that tells a story. And well, it's the kind of thing like most religious texts, they're an argument for a moral truth, but in a narrative.
Yeah, I mean, even visual works do that to a certain degree. And I think that's part of the appeal for a lot of artists and exploration is they're exploring their own narrative and their own perspectives in a visual interpretation. And I really find interesting about even music, because music has such a different way of making you feel and identify, because even a lot of melancholy stuff is uplifting. But I think that is because it's about acknowledgement as well as about mindset. It has a power to make you change mood, for example. And there's a lot of evidence to say that our moods themselves are just our mindsets. If we get stuck with a storm cloud over our head, it's, not until we realize that it's there that we can kind of make the mind up to be a little bit happier. It leads into a whole bunch of different cognitive therapies and things like that when you're talking about depression. And I don't want to say that depression is just, a decision that you unconsciously make. But maybe to a degree, that kind of thinking would be helpful.
Yeah, mindset's definitely one thing, but and then depression is another. I personally haven't suffered from any kind of depressive episodes, but from what I've heard from other people.
I think my optimism bias is quite strong. I think I'm definitely one of those people that thinks I'm never going to be in a plane crash. I'm never going to die of cancer. All those kinds of things that you just do because you have to reinforce that as a coping mechanism in life in general.
Always look on the bright side of life. Give us your liver. Come on. You're not really using it, are you?
So unfortunately, Naomi had to go, as we said, but it's really obvious that she and a lot of other artists that we've met embody what Carol Dweck, an American psychologist, calls the growth mindset. This psychologist argued that outside our emotional awareness, there are two main opposing mindsets, the fixed and the growth mindset. Okay, so the former assumes a more static opinion of our character, our intelligence, our creative ability, and the latter assumes a more fluid opinion of this. So that failure is part of growth and therefore is more desirable because it facilitates development, and therefore, our potential and success in our lives is more achievable. The good news is that our mindsets are also fluid. Like we said before, our attitudes and our mindsets towards life are formed at an early age. This is really a key thing to remember. As adults, I think, like we said, we've spent a better part of our lives reinforcing familiar thinking patterns, identifying much of how we perceive and react to the world as just being how we are. Which, when we go back, I'd like to get people to have a think about themselves and maybe ask a friend or even just jot some stuff down. But think about what our ideas are of, what makes up our personality, why we enjoy certain things and hate others, and like how our abilities that we've come to know and build upon, how this affects the way we learn new things and colours our decisions on other things. I think that's really interesting. So if you would look at talent as an example. So a lot of people feel that, through their hard work or, their interest over their lives, they get to a point in adulthood that they believe they're talented at something. So this might just be as simple as being able to talk to anyone in the room. So you might feel like you're talented at being approachable and easygoing. You can make friends really easily and all that kind of stuff. But, that comes from somewhere. And our mindset about that is formed quite early. So I might have the opposite. So my mindset might be that I'm not very good at those things, but so that reinforces an anxious behaviour, which can have a negative effect on our lives. But if we're aware of that mindset before we walk into a room, we can, I think, consciously choose to go around that.
Well, I think maybe when you walk into the room might be a bit late, but if you know that you're that sort of person, then maybe you can actually say, go do a course on human behavior or something like that, to kind of, like Seb said during our last podcast. I'm not quite sure whether it got into the podcast because I had to cut so much out of it. Unfortunately, we had some really good discussions, but he said that because he knew that he had some what might be considered personality flaws, but in other cases might just be considered aspects of his personality that might have restricted him from being really personable. All it did was meant that he had to go and study some stuff and kind of learn a couple of tricks to kind of overcome those things. But one thing that I was thinking while you were talking was that I'd heard a study a little while ago that kind of showed that depending on what mindset you have, whether you're a fixed or a growth, you actually make kind of moralizing judgments on other people.
Yeah, I read that. And like the most important thing, I think this was brought up in the whole context of raising children and, being aware of how we speak to them when they're learning new things. So when they first go to school and you say to them, "Oh, you're so intelligent. You must have been able to figure that out so easily." That's sort of the wrong thing to say. And I think there's been a big push towards that kind of language, over the last little bit.
Like encouraging.
Yeah,
talk.
you do it with good intentions, but what you really need to be doing is praising their effort. Because by praising their effort, you're praising their ability to work hard and grow, and you're not necessarily giving them that paralyzing fear of failure.
Yeah.
If
you're only
when kids who are basically talked to in a way that makes them feel smart, it means it's unfortunately had this negative knock-on effect where it means that they think they should just be able to do things without effort. And when they actually have to put the effort in to do something, then when it becomes too hard, it becomes paralyzing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can see that. Well, the thing that I found was kind of more talking about, if somebody, if you're of a fixed mindset and you think that other people are also kind of built with innate skill sets, you will kind of judge people with poor skill sets as being just worthless, with no ability to kind of gain to make gains on their skills and their abilities.
Yep.
Whereas if you're a growth mindset, you'll actually have a more positive attitude towards people that might be lesser skilled. Like, oh well, you have the ability within you to put in some hard work and be able to do it. But that's not to say that it's your fault if you haven't done it yet. Maybe you just haven't had the opportunity, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, that was the stuff that I read. I can't remember where that came from, though. Hate that.
It makes sense when you look at artists and the way they work. I think we had a discussion about this off air. But I was talking to Naomi and saying, obviously artists have to get to a point where experimentation is part of the process. And if you're so paralyzed at that point of failing, then you're never going to be able to create something and have it, and set it free. And I think artists really, because they invest so much of themselves into their work, by being paralyzed by failure and having a fixed idea of what they can and can't do, they limit themselves incredibly.
I think we got that bit. I think, pretty sure Naomi was talking about the fact that she finds her art really liberating in that way, because she puts all these restrictions around herself in other ways. So that's really cool to hear that she can have that as an outlet. Yeah.
So that optimism bias that you were talking about before.
Yes, the double-edged sword.
Yeah. It affects a lot of our lives. But it also makes us downplay a lot of different things, which can feed into our other mindset. So when you look at the optimism bias by itself, what it does is, for example, if you're going to, everyone knows that smoking causes cancer, and the likelihood of getting in a car crash is quite likely, but those sorts of things, we always feel like it's going to happen to somebody else. If it does happen to us, it's such a shock, because I think it's almost a survival mechanism to a point.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like if we get bogged down,
you couldn't go around all day.
Exactly. It would be in mortal fear of everything.
That's what's called clinical depression.
Yes, to a point. It's so, obviously we have this innate optimism that we should be aware of. But it also affects our mindset to a certain degree. So there are people who studies have shown that when they exercise, lose more weight than others when they do the same amount of exercise in the same way. And part of that is because at an unconscious level, they're coming into that exercise in a way that means they're expecting a higher result. And that expectation does a lot of physiological stuff to your body. So it's not great. The difference isn't massive. But there was a study done, I think, of cleaners or maids at like 6 really massive hotels in the US, and they basically went and told these, like, asked these people, did a survey and said, like, well, how much exercise do you do? And a lot of them said, well, we don't really do any, we don't have any time. And then they sat half of the group down and said to them, well, do you realize that the cleaning that you do, the vacuuming, the cleaning of the bathrooms, the making of beds and all that kind of stuff, how much calories that you burn doing this? And they're like, oh yeah, okay, cool. And then they didn't say anything to the other half. And then 6 weeks later, they came back and found that the people that they'd actually had that talk with had lost more weight in that time. So it's a bit of a hard study to judge, though, because I think within that time they didn't monitor what they did. So they might have come to work the next day and gone, oh, you know what, I'm going to kick ass at this and I'm going to burn off all my calories. But, that mindset there is obviously a big thing. It colours how we come to lots of different things. Because our mindset and our emotions, like we said, are established at an early age, it becomes critical then that we help our children with books such as Mr. Huff, which is, you'll see the post on the blog from a couple of days ago, which is basically a story of a young child who has like an embodiment of their bad mood. So they wake up kind of in a bad mood, and that sort of sets the tone for the day. And during the day, this Mr. Huff becomes a shadow over their shoulder, like a bad cloud. And, through the day, this child has to endure this, looming mood that he's got. But it's not until he kind of realizes what it is and sees himself in that process that he's able to kind of make a conscious decision to be happy again. And, we all have days like that, and especially with children who don't really understand that process and they don't really understand what their emotions can do and the effects that it can have. I think it's a really important book to generate that discussion.
Yeah, I think that obviously there's some limitations on all this stuff, and it's at the point where a depressive state turns into something more, like what do they call it? There's actually a name for it. Oh, I can't remember it at the moment. But your body actually goes into this feedback loop with your hormones. So you start feeling depressed, but if the depression lasts for a certain amount of time, you actually get into this low hormone state. And sometimes or some people just have irregular hormones. Like there's a fellow that runs a podcast called Imaginary Fringe Show, and he has had bouts of depression almost monthly or every couple of months, or sometimes it might go for 6 months before he has a bout of depression. And it wasn't until kind of about a year ago, I think, that he went and got some help about it, because something hit him real hard. His employment status was all up in the air, and he'd just got a loan for a house, and it was going to really be a big problem for him. It ended up turning out well for him with his employment. That wasn't a problem, but that didn't stop him from basically having a giant anxiety attack over the whole thing, which triggered his depression. And then he went and asked his family about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we've all gone through that." So it runs in the family, but he didn't know about it because nobody ever talks about it.
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of different stuff that comes together with, depression. It's not just a mood.
No. So this is obviously, we're talking at quite a small scale with mindset, where if you do are having a hard time with depression or something like that, do get some help. There's Lifeline if you're in a crisis situation, or go and see your GP. They can usually put you onto a specialist or a psychologist and take that route, definitely, because we're talking about bad moods, like as far as mindset goes, and we can only do so much. We're not professionals here, so we would encourage you, if you're having a severe depressive state, do make sure you get help.
Yeah, definitely. It's important. We all need to look after each other and ourselves.